a series highlighting the cultural and social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Surviving Death. That's the title of a recently published book by Charles Meyer, the Pastoral Care Director at St. David's Hospital. Surviving death is also the task of those suffering the loss of loved ones. And the life after death issue pertains to us all. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And today is particularly fitting that we should have our thoughts turn to this issue of surviving death, this marking the beginning of Holy Week, during which the meaning of the death and resurrection for Christians is very much at the forefront of thought. And also, as Ramadan began last week, Passover commencing next week, it's an indication of how our Muslim and Jewish brothers and sisters also are reflecting upon life and death matters with us all. And we're privileged to have today with us the book's author, Chuck Meyer from St. David's Hospital, and also Janice Smith, the Pastoral Care Director of Hospice Austin, support service in the community with those who are terminally ill and with their families. And we welcome you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And you subtitled your book, Chuck, The Practical Guide to Caring for Those Who Are Confronting This Life and Death Issue. And give us just a little bit of an indication of the kind of care that you're setting forth here.
Well, I wanted to be as practical as I could in it. I kept being asked to talk to groups, as Janice does too, about how do you deal with dying people. So the first chapter in the book is being with dying. How do you be with dying people? Because people don't know what to do. So I talk about the most important thing is to be there, to really be present, because from the instant of the diagnosis of terminal illness, people start backing away. So it's really important to be there, to be with the dying person. The thing that dying people most complain about to me is loneliness. It's like, where'd all my friends go?
Why do you think that's works that way, that people back off?
Well, I think it's because of our own fear of our own death. And one of the things that I tell people who are caregivers of dying folks is that the most important thing that they can do is to have a look at their own death. What do you want done in terms of artificial interventions, treatment, those major issues? Do you have a living will? Do you have a durable power of attorney for health care? Once you've looked at those issues for yourself, you'll be much more sensitive to those folks who are dying. Nursing studies show, for instance, that dying patients on normally non-dying nursing units get the least amount of care of anybody on the unit. Nurses, physicians, clergy, caregivers we tend to back off because of our own scare of our own death.
I see. Do you find that the case in your work with hospice?
Well, I think that's why hospice originally started, because there was such a need for people that are dying, because they're lonely and relegated to spots that people weren't caring for them as they did others. And so we actually go in people's homes mainly, so it's a different concept, and the loneliness is reduced.
So that the service that you offer in terms of practical care is like what he's talking about, just being there and indicating that that they're not alone. But there are other dimensions to caring besides that. What else do you have?
I always encourage people to listen more than you talk. Often visitors or caregivers think that they have to give answers, they have to provide solutions, they have to talk about chatty subjects. And I so encourage people to listen, follow the patient's agenda. Whatever they want to talk about is fine with me. It's also not required for dying people to talk about dying. Some people read death and dying books that go on about the virtues of talking about it. It's important for some people and it's not for others. The important thing is to figure out what's important for this person and enable them as best we can.
So as far as the practicalities of knowing what to say, I infer from that is sometimes that's not so important as to just be able to listen closely. And that there are no magic words to be able to help somebody through that process.
I think that's true.
And in your training, you not only as pastoral care director, do this calling and service yourself, but you're training others to do this. Can you add to what Chuck has said in terms of these other skills that are needed?
Empathy, compassion. Listening is crucial with our heart, not just to the words, and I think Chuck says that in his book. Listening to the feel of the words and what the feelings are.
Attending to body language?
Yeah, body language. The most important thing, I think, is paying attention to being there with them as to where they are instead of us putting our own agenda onto. And that's a natural thing that we as caregivers want to do, and particularly close people, family members. It's easy to do that.
Well, you know, one of the things that occurs to me as a pastor in calling on folks who are in the hospital for non-threatening conditions, it's one thing to relate to them, you know, when does the doctor say you can go home? And when there is no going home, then it seems like it's much more of a challenge in terms of being able to accept that person's terminal condition without being threatened yourself, and staying close to them as far as what they're feeling. I'm just kind of developing from what you both said, that if the focus is on their feelings rather than your own feeling of inadequacy.
Right.
Or to say that, you know, I feel real inadequate talking with you about this.
The truth always helps.
Yes.
Gentle truth.
When in
gentle
doubt,
truth.
tell the truth.
Yeah, right. When you don't know what to do, tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Gently.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty with this. I'm aware that you and I have talked about you're having a terminal prognosis. I'm not sure how to handle that with you. Tell me what's going on with you with this.
Well, your truthfulness in that regard is a help to us at this point in time, and a reminder of that. The other thing that I was particularly interested in, a point that you made here, that you try to demythologize. I don't think you use that word, but that's the one that I apply to it, the various myths associated with death. Like, you say, the old saw, time heals all wounds.
Right.
Just ain't true.
It's not true. It's a lie. And to say that to someone is to accuse them of psychological malingering. It's like saying, well, it's been 6 weeks, aren't you over this yet? It's been 6 months. Haven't you cleaned out the closet yet? It's been a year, aren't you dating yet? What do you think, he's coming back? All of those things I've just said have been said to people in bereavement groups that I've done. And it really is, I think, a way to push people along at your agenda without being attentive to the survivor's agenda.
But that's based on the assumption that time should bring you along automatically.
Yes.
And you're saying in the book, you say time in many ways, if not always,
Time's
makes it worse.
Time's going to make it worse, at least for the first year. And I want to be real clear with people that for that first year, you've got to go through each birthday, holiday, anniversary without that significant person perhaps for the first time in 40 years or 50 years. Or if it's an infant, you're going through anticipated times without that person. So you can anticipate things may get worse, at least for the first year and possibly beyond that. So that people really need to hear that to cut themselves some slack on the time frame. I have people come in my office, Janice I'm sure has this too, feeling guilty that it's been 6 months or 9 months and they're not feeling better. And I want to assure them this is pretty normal.
They start feeling worse, really, if they're doing their work.
Because the grief process is painful.
It's so painful.
Yes.
And there's no getting around it.
And they think they're going crazy because they're supposed to be getting better. And
everybody tells me time heals all wounds, I should be getting over this.
But they're feeling worse. And once they hear or read that it's normal and that they're okay, it's a tremendous relief.
Well, what does heal?
I think your phrase you said, the clock's not ticking.
The clock's not ticking.
You know, there's no
time
that you have to do this with 6 months and this within...
And sort of some of the rules of thumb that it takes a year or 2 years to get over somebody's death may or may not work.
I want to be real clear about that. I don't think you ever get over the death in that sense. And people use medical terminology on what is a psychospiritual process. People talk about getting on with or getting over as though you break your arm or you get over the flu, and you should get over for me, the image is more of a tapestry image. Our lives are tapestries. And the death of a close loved one is a gaping, ripping, bleeding hole in the tapestry of your life. So the question is really then, how does that tapestry get rewoven? Well, it doesn't magically over time fit back together. What happens, my image for that is, that the survivor reaches in and pulls those threads together using their strength, ties them off, and then allows others from their caring community to snip threads off their tapestries, bring them in and tie them off. So that with that kind of loving, caring interaction, compassionate interaction, over time and with a lot of work, the tapestry gets rewoven. But that glitch in the tapestry will always be there. So that 20 years from now, you may be reviewing the tapestry of your life and see that glitch. You get teary, you get upset, and that's perfectly normal.
Yeah, yeah. What, he's indicating some of the things that heal wounds besides time, and I think the implication there is the community, people that are in supportive relationship to you. Can you add to that in terms of the resources that can be brought to bear to individual who's feeling like it's, you know, past time that they should have gotten over this loss?
I think it takes at least one person to talk to.
Yes.
Just one. If a person just has one person, then that will listen to the story, retelling of the story over and over and over and over again. And sometimes that has to be, with hospice, we have a bereavement, a period in which there's a volunteer that stays with, that'll call and check in through that whole grief process. And so, you know, I think our rituals, our religious rituals are helpful, you know, in terms of the life and death and helping someone realize that they are gonna get through it, but it just kind of flows, and it's going to take some time.
I think for caregivers, there are two important things come to mind. One is what you said about checking in. Most people won't check in with a survivor for fear of upsetting them, when in fact it's really our fear of our own upset. I think it's important to call the survivor on the date of the death and check in.
Yeah, birthdays,
holidays, anniversaries. The other thing I recommend is what I call a 2 a.m. insurance policy. Write your name and phone number on a piece of paper and give it to the survivor and say, you can call me at 2 o'clock in the morning when you don't have anybody to call. Makes all the difference in the world having somebody or waking up at 2 o'clock and not having anybody.
And that's better than just saying, well, let me hear from you, sort of thing.
Or, if you need something, call me. People will never call.
Right. Well, let's talk about the relation to the rituals you were referring to, the not just the liturgies and the formal church aspect of things, or synagogue, or whatever the religious community may be, but the faith structure, the belief system, however you want to refer to the inner life spiritually. And in fact, this chapter you have on death and spirituality, I found suggestive, because you talk about letting go. That spirituality has this dimension of releasing, and the reference to Jesus. Even, you say, letting go of God. Well, I had to read that one twice.
Yes.
So, can you elucidate a bit?
Oh, sure. That's a longer discussion than we have time for, but it is important, I think, as a part of this process, to let go of what may have been real rigid images of God, and to allow God to be present with me in new ways than maybe God has ever been before, and to allow that to happen through liturgy, to allow it to happen through friends, and really it does involve, I think, letting go of my staid image of who God has been for me, and allow God to work through this bereavement process in maybe totally new ways. Does that make sense for you?
Okay, do you, for instance, I think about the honesty in prayer. You're talking about the honesty with one another, but in a sense to say, well, to whom it may concern at this point in my life, everything that I thought was holding things together isn't, and do you counsel people to just kind of pray in that rather even doubtful way sometimes?
Oh, sure, yeah. And to express the anger, you know, whatever's going on, to say, help, or this is what's going on with me, and direct it.
Yeah, I guess I need to also, Janice, think about this thought that's suggested in the book about the afterlife. There's not too much in here about the afterlife, Chuck. You say surviving death, that's for living folks to
Right.
get through the grief process.
Okay.
This is the week before Easter, a Christian holiday celebrating the resurrection. Can people get through the grief process without a conviction of an afterlife? Because I hear folks say in the church quite a bit, you know, I just don't know what I would do if I didn't have something to hold on to in the way of life everlasting. So what's your relationship with folks on that issue?
Well, my experience is people do that. I've seen them do it. It depends on what gives them meaning, where their meaning is in their life, and it can be their children, it can be their memories. It can be something totally new that they haven't experienced before, some new creativity, something creative in their lives. But they don't have a concept or a belief in an afterlife. And they still have hope, which is odd, I know, for us as Christians to believe that's true.
But
I've seen that. Oh, yeah. You have, haven't you?
Yeah, sure have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Well, I think that the thing that you're pointing to is some sense of hope based on meaning and coherence of life, meaningfulness.
Continuity, some of that continuity that life, the old cliche, life goes on. That this person has some meaning. Not necessarily that the death has meaning, but that the person continues to have meaning for them is a very powerful image.
And
I have a problem with the death always having to have a meaning. That's part of the, I think, dysfunctional theology.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Well, the problem of imputing meaning to the death, that this death was for a reason or a purpose, or God did this to get your attention, or any of the other myths that I talk about in there, can be real dangerous stuff. I mean,
your numbers
really,
up sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm intrigued too by the fact that you say that there is life after death for the person who survives a loss of a loved one, as that loved one continues to be real to them. And I know grief has been defined as that tension or that pain between the physical absence of someone that has been close to you and the emotional presence. That the person continues to be with you emotionally while physically absent, and that contradiction creates this pain.
That's well put.
And yet you have to detach. You have to eventually say that person is no longer here physically.
Or if not detach, then integrate. I don't think you ever
Integrate.
You never detach.
Okay.
And that's the fear, I think, that people have. That, because my experience is that people are often unwilling to give up really horrendous grieving for fear that if I give that up, that knot in my gut, then I have now lost, I have detached, and I've totally lost that person. When in fact, what happens is that we integrate and reweave that experience into our life.
Is this why some people get stuck in their grief? In other words, somebody's been dead for many years and they're still acting like it was yesterday.
I think that's part of it, yeah.
That's not having integrated the loss.
Yes, correct.
It's replaying it
Yes.
in an endless and
An endless loop.
I've seen,
not
I'm
integrating.
sure you have too, folks that just can't seem to get out of that.
It's like it was yesterday morning.
Yeah. And is that because of some insecurities or some
I don't know.
unresolved?
I think a lot of unfinished business takes its form in unresolved grief. Would you agree with that?
I think it's difficult to face the pain of it because it's so agonizingly painful. And you know, we live in a culture where we want to avoid pain and have quick fixes, and it's a slow, painful process, and not much support from the community, really, you know.
Yeah. Everybody urging you to hurry up and get over this.
Yeah, everyone's wanting you to, you know.
So they don't have to deal with their scare.
And everyone's walking around with unresolved grief from past losses, and so to see someone actively grieving is really, you know,
stirs up your own stuff.
Stirs up a lot of stuff.
It doesn't have to be the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of a job. Or
oh yeah, childhood, adolescence, you know.
Parent loss, change in identity, loss of identity, disability,
any kind of change.
Aging.
Yeah, I know. I felt that keenly when my kids went off to college.
Yes.
And
oh yeah.
I can remember feeling here I am weeping, literally over their going away, and I thought I need to do this, and
I agree.
Because the permission to give yourself to give into that, as distinct from just holding a strong macho exterior, is
have to be strong.
That reminds me of a country western song I heard just recently that said, have you heard it? That said something like, you don't have to feel shame for feeling bad. Have you heard that? For the grief. They were talking about grief, a loss, you know, a loved one or something, and you don't have to feel shame. Well, that's helpful, I think, for folks to hear, that they don't have, it's not like an embarrassment, it's not like something that, you can cry the loss of your children, you know, your sons when they go off.
That's the other thing people told me about the book, that it not only relates to death and dying, but loss in general. Separation, divorce, loss of a job, major move, change in a relationship, that the grief is grief is grief.
I know we're coming into sort of the final part of our program here, and I need to come back, I think, though, to what you said, since because of this being Holy Week, is people tend to rush through Good Friday to get to the joy of Easter, to short-circuit the pain.
Yeah, and the reality of that death. I almost never, as I mentioned earlier, I almost never hear a Good Friday sermon that doesn't have as its major focus Easter and resurrection, when we're not there yet. And that's sort of what we tell people, Janice and I both tell people who are going through a death and grieving, that take the time and work this through.
So a Good Friday service that really does the job is going to leave you feeling this is final.
You bet.
Oh yeah, it's black.
You bet. In the Episcopal Church, I don't know what it is in others, but you leave the building in darkness with the altar stripped bare. It's a powerful symbol of where we are on Good Friday.
Well, I guess that it's a tension in my mind between how you can go from that just in a matter of a couple of days to, you know, all of a sudden acting joyful. And something there is about the meaning of the resurrection that does not deny that finality. And that's sort of hard to get a wrap around for me, and I'm sure for a lot of folks, because we can't even begin to understand what's hereafter. You know, any pictures that we have are creations of our own present earthbound imaginations. But what can be affirmed genuinely, say on an Easter Sunday, about for folks who are in the midst of this grief, and you're assuming you're not trying to short-circuit their pain. What is it that affirmatively, you talk about the experience of the resurrection. I'd like to have both of you talk about what your experience of the resurrection is.
Well, let me jump in.
Go ahead, Chuck.
For me, I heard two questions. One, what can you tell people? Secondly, what is our experience? First thing for me is that the most powerful image is that through Good Friday and Easter, God is consistently with us, standing with us, I think crying with us, I think grieving with us, and being with us on our journey through bereavement to what people describe, and I myself would describe, as a resurrection experience. I think bereavement can be a resurrection experience, but not if it's short-circuited, just like Good Friday and Easter.
Okay, give us a different feel for that or
Well,
perspective on it?
yeah, that it's the same, I think. That death doesn't have the final say, that, you know, it's terrible and it's final, but it's not all there is. There's more, and and I think it's important, like you said, to remember to not try to jump. Well, some people want to wallow in death, you
Yeah,
know.
really, right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to really enjoy the joy when we have
That's
it,
right.
you know, and the Easter, and whenever we have the sorrow, then to feel that and experience that, and that it's all part of the continuity and all part of life, and that God's with us through it all, and that's our hope. Is that I love your
I agree.
definition of hope, not optimism, but hope. You know, that we're safe. Whether
Here or
we're
there.
here or there, whether we're, you know, we die or we're alive, we're safe.
And eternity is in the moment, even here.
Yeah.
Here and now. Well, here and now, you folks have been a lot of help. I think that practically speaking, with this guide that you have, I think that we need to, before making our departure today, take note of where these resources can be pursued. We have the number for Hospice Austin that I think can be shown on the monitor, and folks can reach you there and other people through that service.
I'm at St. David's Hospital.
St. David's Hospital.
Right.
Your book, Surviving Death, is at the bookstore.
At St. David's Gift Shop, run
Gift
by
shop.
our wonderful auxiliary.
St. David's Episcopal Church bookstore. has it?
Bookstore, Logos Bookstore up on Park Crest carries it.
Logos.
And that's it.
Okay, well, I think
Bookstop,
that...
I'm sorry, Bookstop carries it.
Chuck carries it.
And that's right.
If you see me driving down the street, I carry him in the trunk of my car.
Well, we won't stop to have you autograph it here, but we do want to thank you for being here. You've just
Thank
been
you.
great. And we want to thank them also because there's a quote in Chuck's book that indicates that we really don't know how to live until we have learned how to die. And to be alone and to be alone with God is a thought that we can carry with us today as we move from this beginning of Holy Week toward Easter. Thank you, folks, for watching, and we hope that you'll be with us again next week for our next edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.